Pearson. I'm the host of Decisions Now, a podcast brought to you by eValueServe about how to leverage data and AI to improve business decisions. Today, we're joined by our guest, Krista St. Krista is a business transformation senior executive with over 20 years of experience in leading commercial process redesign, data-driven marketing strategies, and sustainability roadmap development. Her expertise spans multiple sectors, including financial services, corporates, nonprofits, and industrial manufacturing. Krista has a proven track record of driving global procurement and logistics transformations, building world-class marketing capabilities, and creating comprehensive sustainability platforms. So Krista, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're excited for today. So today, Krista is going to join us to explore the complex world of supply chain risks and sustainability, especially in a post-COVID era. So let's dive right in. Krista, you've been at the forefront of business transformation for many years. So can you start by painting a picture of how the supply chain landscape has been evolving recently, including the impact of a lot of global events such as, the pandemic, global conflicts, and what I guess the quote unquote new normal looks like today?
Sure. So, the pandemic, I'd say, is the special cause of a century. So if it didn't get your attention in the past 20, 30 years that supply chains are interesting and important, the pandemic certainly shone a light. Very dynamic. And, in two ways. One, demand signals changed basically overnight. So especially at the consumer level, and we all experienced that in different ways. But supplier capability also changed very unexpectedly. And examples of that, worker availability, material availability, energy prices, all impacted suppliers to some degree, varying degrees, and again, unexpectedly. And then on top of that, and this is continues even beyond pandemic, distribution mode disruption really caused some challenges. So on the sea transport, as you're shipping between continents, shipping flows were upended, really, container movements. On land, there were rail impacts, truck impacts, driver availability. So all those things just added up to cause unexpected availability and lack of availability. Separate from pandemic, weather patterns continue to change, weather storms more intense. So all of these things, again, creating disruptions that are unplanned. And the net impact there to day-to-day business is cost, whether it's energy to produce products, freight cost as direct ways, also indirectly, delays in stockouts. And so, the result of that cost is, hey, we need to focus on it and really focus on improving resilience to try and control our destiny when it comes to supply chain.
Yeah, no, I think what you said in the beginning in particular, things like the pandemic and all of these new changes that are happening and we're experiencing, it is causing everybody to rethink things that, you're just taking for granted for the past, 30 years or so. But demand is changing far rapidly. People are also getting used to much faster turnaround times with anything from like fast fashion becoming mainstream, or just the instant gratification of getting things like on Amazon. So it really has impacted how supply chains work, and it continues to change, and people just assume things are going to show up at their house. So it's kind of a shock to the system when it doesn't. So I think it's quite an interesting way to look at it, and it did expose it, I think, a lot more to the general population as well. So in your experience, what are some of the most common supply chain risks that we've been encountering, and how can companies go about identifying these risks in their own operations?
Yeah, so generally, in tagging off our opening, surprises. So you want to eliminate surprises wherever possible. And so looking at supplier specific, and I really do this in two levels. So supplier specific is one set of things to really think about relative to risk. And those include financial health, economic risk, ethical behavior of a supplier, security. So cyber is certainly on the forefront of people's minds. And in this case, do your homework. So you can practice appropriate due diligence when you're choosing suppliers, ongoing supplier management, and that can be done internally or with third-party help. The second level is really taking a step back and looking at macro or network level impacts. And so by this I mean purchase concentration. Are you buying many things from one set of suppliers? Are they all located in a common geography so that if there's some sort of external political or environmental events, they get wiped out all at once? So you want to look at that kind of concentration risk, and it requires you to step back, consider the external factors that might impact your suppliers, and then really, kind of convince yourself that you've spread the risk appropriately. What I found in my experience is having an external partner, someone like a ValueServe, is instrumental in both helping remove your own lens, but also really taking a broad view and looking at possible risks in the supply chain.
Yeah, no, I think it's really interesting because a lot of people aren't necessarily always aware of where the different facilities that they're working with even located, or like what is the distribution of the risk that they have. If there's a drought in one area, that's going to impact potentially the ability to make pieces of equipment that they need as well. So within that, you've mentioned the importance of understanding supplier relationships as well. So can you walk us through the process of tracking and analyzing the thousands of SKUs and to learn about suppliers and why this is crucial for effective supply chain management?
Yeah, sure. And I'll start with the why first. And it's kind of that, you say in common terms, ignorance is bliss. Well, when it comes to supply chain, frankly, ignorance is not bliss. It is risk, and risk can be costly. So there's the why right there. But I think of it in terms of really three steps. First and foremost is all around data hygiene. And so that's, knowing your vendor data, making sure it's accurate and complete. And then the SKU hygiene, also very important. And by SKUs, we mean your raw materials. So all of the pieces that go into producing your product. So knowing the details, doing your appropriate due diligence on your suppliers at the outset. And then second, maintaining a rhythm around maintaining that data. So accurate and complete data checks. All businesses change over time, right? And that includes suppliers. So a supplier may have consolidated operations. So where you thought you had multiple manufacturing sites, oops, now there's just one. So again, going back to that geographic risk, now you're concentrated. There's industry consolidation. So one manufacturer may be gobbling up other players, still maintaining multiple trade names. And so for the same material, you may think you're buying from multiples because you got different trade names, but it really is a single manufacturer. So I can't stress enough that maintaining accurate and complete data on suppliers is important. Next, lots of SKUs that go into the BOM. You've got to prioritize the raw materials. So which SKUs are most important? Whether it's key materials or components that go into your end product that are, what I call mission critical, or maybe there are materials that just have a low substitution availability. So one's not available, you don't have an easy replace. Those are ones you want to kind of bubble up to the top and really take a closer look at. And then the third piece is really, so based on that, which suppliers are mission critical? Who's actually providing those key materials? Do you have situations where you've got sole source? It's only one place to get the material, or they're providing a key ingredient SKU. And so that points to, here's where you need to focus. That's where you need to start to make sure you really understand, to the depth possible, your suppliers, and then what their capability is when times get tough.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. It really is about, it's not just a one and done project. Things can change, and a lot of times these suppliers aren't going to be reaching out to you to say, hey, we've consolidated. Yep. So it's really on you to consistently be doing this research, and don't assume just because you've done it, a year, 2 years, 5 years ago, that it hasn't changed since then, of course.
Very true.
Yeah. So building on that, let's talk about the concept of the value chain. How does understanding the raw materials that go into a product help companies better manage their supply chain risks? And can you describe how you actually can find these as well?
Sure. So when we think in terms of value chain relative to procurement, it's the series of upstream suppliers that produce the thing that you need to buy as your raw material. So just an easy example, you've got supplier A. Let's say they extract a mineral from the earth. They pass that on to supplier B, who refines the mineral to some higher purity, and then that gets sold to supplier C, who actually runs the chemical operation to convert that mineral into the raw material you buy. So from a transaction standpoint, you're only dealing with supplier C, but your deliveries from supplier C may well be impacted if there are problems further upstream with supplier B or supplier A. So just kind of to set that visual. So the first thing is really mapping out how those upstream suppliers are connected. that can be complicated, and it can also be time consuming. It's also not very transparent in many cases. So the information may not be in the public domain, particularly in chemical processes. It will require specific expertise in understanding how processes work. And so this is where, again, a great place to deploy a third-party expert in market intelligence. ValueServe is a great example of that. Saves you time, saves you energy. So determining that value chain for each material you purchase. And then from there, who participates in each step? What's the role that they play? What are their strengths and weaknesses? And once you've got those pieces kind of under your belt, then you can uncover and evaluate where the risks are. And you compare relative risks for different suppliers. You're not going to retire all of the risks. That would be a lot of time and a lot of cost. But you want to, hunt for the things that are going to be the most impactful and focus there. And that's where, in terms of that ongoing process, continue to build your intelligence, across those suppliers.
Yeah. So it's really about prioritizing the type of risks that you have and saying which ones do we incur at the highest rate, and also knowing what might be coming so you can have a contingency plan that's
Right.
put in place as well.
You got it.
So once these risks are identified, decision-making becomes really critical as part of this. You've worked on projects that require or that involve a lot of risk and reward matrices that you've put together. Mm-hmm. So can you explain how people are using these 2x2 matrices, and how can they depict these alternatives and aid in supply chain strategy decisions?
Sure. So a 2x2 or a 4-block matrix, super easy tool used in a lot of places. One of my favorites to compare entities on two different dimensions and identify what's most important and where do I want to focus my time and resources to understand further. So for materials, consider a demand profile. So is the demand, my demand low or high? And then the supply risk also low or high. So materials that are high demand and high supply risk deserve more attention, just as an example. So kind of that you can focus on that quadrant. For suppliers, I actually think in terms of two different questions. Again, one on each axis of the matrix. The first is, how important is the supplier to my business? And so how hard do I lean on them for that key raw material or special ingredient? And then the second is, how important is my business to the supplier? So when times get tough, when material goes short, is that supplier going to be thinking of me first and serving my needs? And so that helps me balance not just my own, inside out view, but also the outside in view. And it helps me reckon with where I need to spend time and energy to, again, underscore connection with suppliers, build relationships, or potentially look for alternatives.
Yeah, and I think what we're going to do is actually put a 2x2 matrix in the episode description as well. So for anyone who's looking for that, you guys can have access to it there. So let's then just be candid about how companies are legitimately approaching supply chain management. In your experience, how well do executives actually understand and prioritize supply chain issues when they are making decisions? And realistically, how much weight is given to factors like price versus potential brand impact or long-term resilience?
Yeah, great question. So, I think first it's important to appreciate, right? Leaders are smart. They're not trying to make poor decisions, but oftentimes they don't have the best information. So you don't have the best set of facts or a full picture. You are going to make a suboptimal decision. And so incomplete or dated information will impact quality decision and prioritization. So that's one, first and foremost, again, back to that, this is a continuous cycle of understanding, really important to keep your data fresh. In terms of then, so what's driving decisions? Price is certainly one when it comes to buying supplies. And historically, supply chain focus has been really on margin pressure. So take cost out, increase my margin, great. Post-pandemic, if you didn't realize it pre-pandemic, there's an increasing recognition supply chain resilience is imperative. And it's not just the pandemic, but it's also business resilience in the face of changing global weather patterns. So that just underscores the point in terms of supply chain resilience. Brand impact has been around for a long time, certainly a driving force for consumer-facing businesses, now increasingly so significant for anyone needing access to capital. So that's how I'd rank the various priorities.
Yeah. And it is quite interesting because it can vary throughout the year depending on other factors that are going into this, how you might rank one over another. You might have to prioritize one, but you do know that it's going to be a risk or potentially a downfall for one of these others. So again, it just comes to what is the right decision in the moment that you're making. But going back to, you don't always have complete data on what's going to happen. You can predict things, but whether it's COVID or, knock on wood, a potential global war that breaks out or expands, and you don't really know what's going to happen. So you can only do with the information that you have. And I think another big piece of this is when people are given data, oftentimes it's static or there's no story that goes along with it as well. So just because you present data to somebody, whether it be an executive or somebody else in your company, if you're just presenting it as raw data, people can interpret it very differently or create their own storyline or dialogue that goes with it. And then they'll start to have the same exact data tell very different stories, and that will impact how different people start to make those decisions. So when you do present the data, if you have an objective or a recommendation, you have to present it under the story and the direction that you want it to go.
Exactly.
So with all of the complex information, data collection and making it valuable for stakeholders is often a challenge, as we've been talking about. So what are the best practices that you found for presenting supply chain insights to high-level executives and coaching them to prioritize these tasks?
Yeah. So I'll just key off what you were just kind of talking about relative to the story thread. So starting out, with the understanding that building supplier intelligence is an ongoing process, and kind of socializing that with your stakeholders. This is going to take resource and require funding, as well as ongoing attention. But starting with a few assumptions and really hypotheses. So what do we think about how our suppliers are operating, where they're getting their materials, et cetera, and then through the discovery process, either validating assumptions or hypotheses, or editing them, changing them out. Maybe you thought something was an issue. Identifying it as a non-issue is equally important. So really, what I'll call retiring risks or noble assertions sometimes, and really getting to the basis of what's really going on. Sharing emerging themes as you go. So if you're the person really intimate into the data, really investigating the suppliers, you got to also recognize your stakeholders are not spending their days thinking about this. So again, go back to that storyline, share the emerging themes as you go. Insights along the way, super important. Don't just wait till the end with a big surprise. Keep people educated, and then you can build on understanding and learning. And oftentimes your stakeholders will have very interesting questions to feedback into the process, and that will just continue the cycle of learning. Narrowing as you go the information that is going to yield most value. That is almost a natural occurrence. You'll realize the things that are important. And then as you approach steady state, really making sure the frequency of the data gathering and the frequency of the touch points is right. Some things you want to have a daily or weekly update on. Other things, quarterly or monthly is more appropriate rhythm. Getting that rhythm right keeps the dialogue fresh and also keeps the information relevant.
Yeah. No, I think those are all great. I think just to key off of that, one of the things you were saying is also understanding who are the people that you're presenting to, knowing that whether it's the frequency, the style of the presentation, or really any component of it, the perspective that you have to bring to it has to be relevant to them, or you're going to lose their attention quite quickly as well. So there's a lot of adaptation that you have to do. And I think the other thing that's important to remember is for people to really grasp onto concepts, repetition shouldn't be understated. So it's not like these presentations are a one and done thing. You have to constantly remind people that this is important and this is the impact of it as well. That's true for anything supply chain and otherwise as well. But there's just so many competing priorities that everybody has that sometimes you feel like a broken record in saying it, but it really does take an immense amount of repetition in order to really build that up and build up the importance to it as well.
And especially in what we call blue sky times, when things are going great, right? This is the easiest thing to not pay attention to. So your point of repetition, can't be emphasized enough.
Yeah, no, I think that's so true. Now, when you start to look towards the future, we're seeing a growing role of AI, of course, in supply chain management. So how are these technologies impacting the field, and where do you see the most potential for AI to automate or improve the supply chain processes?
Yeah, lots of potential application, lots of ideas, a lot of discussion out there in the airspace. So I'll just sort of start there, and certainly supply chain domain wide application. Specific to two areas. First is supplier management, and the second procurement is where I would take this. On the supplier management piece, really getting energy out of the supplier performance prediction is where I think AI can really help us accelerate progress. So forecasting potential supplier issues like financial troubles, quality problems before they occur, and really assigning a risk score or likelihood of occurrence. Using predictive analytics in this capacity to generate risk scores on the basis of past incidents. So, rich data sets, supply chain risks, market volatility. So all of these will enable much more proactive interventions. So again, getting after that, how do I get ahead of the problem before it becomes a problem? On the procurement side, specifically, building out global sourcing insights. So the ability to aggregate data, pull threads from various news feeds, much faster process when you're using AI. Always important to have an expert at the table, somebody who really knows the domain, to keep the truth with the truth. But just that process of gathering, real big opportunity to accelerate using AI.
Yeah. And I think having the expert at the table can't be understated as well. And it's also somebody who will question the data. Like they have enough experience behind them that they'll say, this just doesn't seem right. This is too good to be true, or it seems like they're missing parts of the data. So just somebody who's, been around the block a few times before is so important to have as well.
Agreed.
So as we wrap up here, given all that we've discussed about risks, sustainability, and emerging technologies, what advice would you want to give organizations looking to build a more resilient and sustainable supply chain given today's environment?
Yeah, so I'll use the old adage, eat the elephant one bite at a time. So step one, figure out where you are right now. That's the best starting place to figure out where you want to go to, but where you are in terms of supplier data quality, your supplier relationships, and then also the risks that you know about across your supply chain. So have those three things kind of ordered in your mind. Then consider recent problems. Where have you gotten burned lately? Where has been, a one-off or a special cause event versus more systemic issues that are just part of your day-to-day variation. Separate those out, identify the urgent things, put out the fires that you need to manage, and then focus on the ongoing. Start with the items that cause the most pain, and then work down from there. You don't need to risk-proof everything. If you're spending your time and energy doing risk-proofing, you're probably not spending the time and energy you need to run your business. So, this comes with equal measure. And it's very important to consider cost-benefit trade-offs. So, significant risks that will bring you to your knees, you got to address those. More mundane or day-to-day things that are in the background may not be as big a priority. So kind of put your resources on your critical things, and then over time you'll continue to improve. If you're in a point of urgency and you really want to move fast, best advice is get expert help. So lean on a third-party market intel agency or provider. Again, EvaluServe has been a great partner for me. And you can bring domain expertise in quickly and really get a head start on understanding your landscape.
Yeah. Well, I think that's great. I think it's a great way to end as well. I think you have some great tips, but it's focusing on the biggest pain points, but it's also understanding where you're at today, and don't bite off more than you can chew. That's for sure. So Krista, it was great having you on today. I really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks so much for sharing all of your insights.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Decisions Now. Check out all episodes at evaluserve.com/podcast, and don't forget to subscribe for future episodes.